Let every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring, ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the lifting skies. Let it resound loud as a rolling sea.
Sing a song full of the faith that the darkness has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. They sing the rising sun as a new day begun. Let us march on till victory is won.
Stony the road we trod, bitter the chestnut rod, felt in the day that fell, unborn and died, yet with a steady beat, have not a weary feet, come to a place on which our Father sat.
We have come over a way with the tears has been watered. We have come treading our path through the flood of the slaughter. Out from the gloomy past, till now we stand at last, where the white gleam of our bright star is cast.
Out of our weary years, out of our silent tears, thou who hast brought us thus far on the way, thou who hast by thy might led us into forever in the path we pray. Bless our feet straight from the places our God where we met. Bless our hearts drunk with the
Sorry for the technical difficulties, everybody. I think we will have to move on from the performance, unfortunately, but I will go ahead and get the next video started for us.
Hello, Buckeyes. I'm Dr. Danny Glassman, your Dean of Students. Today is Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day, an important day for us to reflect and to remember the life and legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. So today, I'm proud of each of you for choosing to have a day on instead of a day off on this holiday to serve and make a difference in the communities in which you're serving. So thank you from me and thank you from all of us here at Ohio State for choosing to make a difference. As Martin Luther King Jr. reminded all of us, it's important that we make a difference and we are involved in our communities. So today you're doing that, and I hope that you'll continue to do that both during your time with us here at Ohio State and on. So have a great day today, be safe, get to know one another in the communities in which you serve, and I wish all of you the very best this semester and this year. Take care, Buckeyes, and have a great one. Thank you.
Hello, and thank you for participating in Ohio State's Dr. Martin Luther King Day of Service. I'm thrilled that so many of you have chosen to honor Dr. King's incredible legacy in true Buckeye fashion by leaning in and paying forward. In an effort to help keep our university family healthy amid the rise in coronavirus cases, this year's in-person Day of Service now spans several days virtually. It's an unfortunate sign of a pandemic now in its third year. It's also, in a way, a step towards expanding the spirit of generosity, justice, and community year-round. Dr. King spoke frequently of the beloved community, a world in which poverty, prejudice, and violence had been overcome and all people truly prospered. While we've not yet realized this vision, we can still help make it a reality, and we must heed his warning to not wait on time. Human progress never rolls in on wheels of inevitability, Dr. King said. It comes through the tireless efforts and the persistent work of dedicated individuals. Ohio State has a role here. That's why we're creating pathways for our undergraduates to earn their degrees debt-free and recruiting faculty through our RAISE initiative who are experts in racial inequities. These scholars will be role models for our students and contribute new ideas to eliminate suffering and foster real opportunities for all people to become the best versions of themselves. Each of us also has a role individually to help remake unjust systems, resist unjust acts, and resolve to lead with love for all human beings. I'm proud to know you're doing that right now. Understanding society's inequities is the first step to meaningfully addressing them. Extending a measure of comfort to the humblest members of our community can alter the trajectory of a life in profound ways. Far from waiting on time, you're seizing the moment. We certainly miss being physically together as we honor Dr. King's extraordinary work. Yet, as he noted so perfectly, the time is always right to do right. Thank you for doing right today and every day. Each of you embodies the best of our Buckeye community. Each of your kind acts contributes to the momentum of human progress, and I'm excited to work alongside you to build our beloved community together.
All right, thank you, Hunter. And of course, thank you to the African American Gospel Voices Choir, Dr. Glassman, Brutus, and Dr. Johnson for those opening remarks. So hello and welcome everyone to our criminal justice panel hosted by Pay It Forward as part of our Martin Luther King Jr. Week of Service. My name is Rachel Hofacker and I will be moderating tonight. So Pay It Forward is a service-based cohort out of the Office of Student Life, and we aim to make service opportunities accessible to the student body while emphasizing meaningful service and bringing awareness to various social justice issues in our community. This event is being recorded and you can access it later by visiting our website. The link is in the chat. And our theme for MLK Week this year is Closing the Gap. This refers to the effort to end inequities so that everyone may have equal opportunity to pursue education, healthcare, careers, political engagement, and countless other institutions. Closing the gap is important as we recognize the disparities marginalized groups face every day in this country and on our very campus. I'd also like to take a moment to thank the other members of the MLK Initiative for their hard work and support in planning all the events for MLK Week. Emmanuel Long, Zara Sen, and Madison Yee have been working diligently since October to see these events come to fruition. And of course, thank you to Hunter Jones, our advisor. Without you all, this would not have been possible. Pay It Forward wants to prioritize the health and safety of the community first during this time. Later this semester, we will hopefully be able to offer more in-person service opportunities, but please visit our website to stay up to date on activities. As a reminder, if you registered to complete an at-home service kit, pickup will continue tomorrow from 12 p.m. to 3 p.m. at the Ohio Union Info Desk. Finally, our new member applications for Pay It Forward are open currently until February 6th. And for students passionate about service and looking to develop leadership skills, Pay It Forward is a great opportunity, so please see our website to apply. All right, and now I'd like to introduce our panelists for this evening. So here we have with us Dr. Terrance Hinton, who is a professor out of the Sociology Department and the John Glenn College of Public Affairs, and Mr. Pierce Reed of the Ohio Innocence Project. So thank you so much for being here tonight, both of you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Of course. All right, so we'll hop into the first question. Can you each please describe the work that you do and how you got started? Dr. Hinton, if you'd like to go ahead and start.
Absolutely, Rachel. Thank you. And again, good evening, everyone. So my journey was a little bit different. I originally had aspired to go into law enforcement several years back, and due to some unforeseen circumstances, a number of individuals and relatives close to me ended up making some decisions and ended up going to jail and prison for some time. And what I noticed when they got out was the amount of challenges that they had coming back into community. And for those of you who don't know, if you have a felony or even a misdemeanor on your record, it's like a scarlet letter. So the question for me was, how are people expected to reintegrate back into community when they have so many obstacles against them? So I decided to go into the reentry field. Up until this last year of January, I worked for a nonprofit agency called Alvis Incorporated, which is in Columbus, Ohio. I worked in the area of workforce development and managed the EDGE and Hire program, where I worked with thousands of individuals who were coming out of prison throughout the state of Ohio and nationally, and kind of assisting them with getting back on their feet, how to answer those questions when they go into a job interview, and how to answer that and how to move forward. Since that time, outside of teaching at Ohio State, I still work kind of in a consulting role where I still work with individuals within Columbus who are coming out of jail and prison and trying to navigate this new norm. So it's something that it's a calling, it's something I'm passionate about, and a lot of success stories. And so that's what leads me here to talk to you all today.
I think I have had a very odd career path, in part because I'm so old. A lot of things have happened along the way. I'm what I consider an accidental attorney. I'm a first-generation college student, and when I was growing up, I never once thought about becoming a lawyer. I wanted to be a lot of things, mostly a writer, and some of those skills have transferred. But it just, to me, law was not something that I realized impacted my life as much as it was, and certainly for my family. And our family values the best thing that you could be was a priest or a minister. It was pretty clear to me in childhood that was not a calling I was going to have. I'm much better at being a sinner than a saint. But the other things that really strove forward in my family was the notion of teaching, that education is empowerment, and that one of the best things that you can do for not just yourself, but for your country is really to devote yourself to educating you and everybody that you knew, so that everybody could realize the great opportunities that America offered. And some of that, I think, as I've grown older, I realize that I'm much more bitter and jaded than these people were, but they really believed in the promise of America. They didn't necessarily ignore the realities that some Americans faced. And I was raised with this notion that there is inequality and that part of our role is to try and make things better. So when I went to college, I had absolutely no idea what I was going to do, but pretty quickly decided on psychology. And once I was on that path, I expected to be a psychologist, probably working with post-traumatic stress disorder. This was the 1980s. There was a lot of discussion about how people who had served in the military, particularly Vietnam, were suffering when they returned home. And that was something that drew me. But ultimately, I didn't go on to graduate school. I was admitted, but the day classes start, I withdrew and took a job in Boston at a pediatric children's hospital that worked around child abuse issues. And it was an interdisciplinary field where on our team, we had a lawyer. And that was the very first time in my life that I saw an attorney that I could identify with. It didn't necessarily make me want to be a lawyer, but it did teach me that there was some value in advocacy on behalf of people who don't have an equal seat at the table and don't have an ability to speak for themselves. That led me to continue to work mostly as a social worker on behalf of victims. I went from child abuse to domestic violence to hate crimes and really loved it. I went to law school because of the AIDS epidemic in the late 80s and early 90s, when there were no medical treatments. People didn't have any hope. When you were diagnosed as HIV positive, it really was effectively a death sentence. And for the most vulnerable people in the country, people of color, especially women of color, people who use drugs by injection, and gay men. And it was one of those eras where, despite the devastation, and I think that a lot during the pandemic, the fear that people have, the unknown, am I somebody who's sick? Am I somebody who could carry this to somebody else? And what I realized along the way was that law was one of the few things that offered anybody a potential for hope. It was this notion that we could change the way things were. And the Americans with Disabilities Act is a prime example of that. We all take it for granted at this point, and everybody on the campus knows that you're entitled to accommodations. But in the early 90s, there was a huge question of whether that act would ever be signed into law and what it meant for people. The same thing with the notion that we could go to our courts and get effective relief. As the decades have gone on since then, I think we've all come to question that. And really what that did for me is give me the perspective that I wanted to work within the system. In my younger years, I was somebody who was demonstrating frequently the precursors to some of the movements we've seen over the last few years. And I was very good at being angry. There was a lot to be angry about, not just around HIV, but about women's healthcare, about foreign policy, about the way we treat people without homes, people without food. And it led me to work into the courts. I started in the federal courts working with a judge back in Boston. And then when I moved to Ohio in 2004, I spent about 12 years at the Ohio Supreme Court as the senior attorney to now Chief Justice Maureen O'Connor. And it was a wonderful experience. I lost many battles with my former boss, but I think for most of us, we find a lot of redemption in her these days. And I get to say, I told you so. She wasn't that bad. But what it really led me to the Innocence Project, I think, was a bit of karma. I was taking a little bit of a break. Had decided to leave the court and really just wanted to go on a gap year. I had helped one of my nephews do that the year before. He was transitioning from high school to college, didn't know what he wanted to do, went into a service project. And by the end of it, I thought, that's what I want to do. I needed to reset my life. I didn't get a year. I got about 3 months. A judge that I knew, who was a professor at the College of Law at UC, sent me a random email that said, have you figured out what you're doing with your life yet? And I just wrote back, no, why? And it was this job description. And I applied for it honestly because I was somewhat intrigued, but mostly because I had 48 hours before the posting was going to be taken down. So I applied not knowing if I would hear anything. I was fortunate enough to get the job, and that was about 4 years ago. It was a new position that was created at OIP. The first year was brutally awful. I wondered if I had made the biggest mistake of my life, and I've made a lot of mistakes. But since that point, it has been just the most rewarding work I've ever done. And every day I get up feeling privileged that I get to do it. The clients that we serve are people who have taught me more, not just about law, but about life, and continue to inspire me every day. It's hard work, but I said to somebody today, I love this job, but it's going to kill me. At least I'll die happy. And I still kind of feel that way. But if I can die happy, it's a bonus.
All right, thank you both. So getting into kind of the bulk of the questions, we'll start off. What are some of the biggest challenges that marginalized groups face in the criminal justice system?
Where do I start? For me, I guess to keep it simple from my perspective, because you can talk about this, you can make the argument it really starts before, but when, for me, for the individuals I work with, they're coming in and out, and some of the biggest challenges are particularly centered around employment, housing, getting access to the basic things that are needed to move forward with your life. Again, once you have a felony conviction, it bars you from a number of things. Give you just a small example, and you can all look this up. Just in the news the other day, there was an individual that received a heart from a pig. It was the first a pig transplant, pig heart transplant. And what has emerged in the news is the fact that the individual who received it was an individual who had been formerly incarcerated. And so now there's these questions about should this individual, because I believe he had stabbed somebody, again, not dismissing the charge, but he served 6 years in prison. And what the author in the New York Times was arguing was, should this individual had deserved to receive a heart because of his charge? And you see people how polarizing just that topic. This just happened a couple of days ago, and how polarizing you see some of the comments. And there are a lot of people, no, he doesn't deserve to live. He needed a new heart, and this guy didn't have long to live. And that is what individuals are facing when they come out. And again, that was just recent, right? So there's all these things that when you are labeled people call it a felon, a criminal, a convict, there's all these obstacles. And so for me, it's hard to really pinpoint one single thing. It's across the board, trying to find a place to live. In Columbus, Ohio, you might come out, and I'll work with a client and he wants to live in a nicer part of Columbus because he might be from the west side, the hilltop, and he doesn't want to go back there because that's where he got in his trouble. Well, it's hard to get an apartment with a background for housing, so he can't live anywhere on some of the nicer areas of Columbus, but he can go back to the hilltop no problem, and he's trying to go go away from there. So and people talk about employment, where there's a lot of jobs available right now. There is. But if you have a background, that's not necessarily the case. You can go get a job for $12 an hour. But for those of you, a lot of you students, you're not living on your own yet. But when you have a home, a mortgage, kids, that's not sustainable. So this perception that there are a lot of jobs available, that depends on who you are. When you have a felony, a lot of those things are not available to you. TSA pre-check, something as simple as that. You can still fly, but you cannot go through the TSA pre-check line because of your background. So to me, the biggest obstacles are really those basic necessities that individuals need when they come out in order to move forward and be successful with their lives. Housing, employment, all those, the basic necessities.
I'd echo all of that. The one thing I would add to it is that I think we have to be aware of how marginalized people are often at a lot of intersections. So poverty is a great equalizer in a bad way when it comes to the criminal justice system. And that's not to say that I think public defenders or attorneys who are handling a defense case on a pro bono basis aren't equally as good as lawyers in the biggest firms in the world. Some of them are the brightest and most talented people I've ever met. But the way the system is structured still has a negative impact on people who are dependent on public defense, because public defenders are chronically underfunded, they are chronically overworked, and no matter how smart you are and how hard you work, if you have a caseload of 400 clients, there's no way that you're going to be able to effectively represent all of them. Yet the standard for being an effective lawyer, which is a term within the law, is basically that you have been admitted to the bar. I remember feeling very humbled, as happy as you are to realize that you passed the bar exam. You have no real understanding of what it is that you're going to do. You know it intellectually, but you haven't done it yet. And I remember wondering if this is something a surgeon goes through, that you know what you're supposed to do, but how do you make that first incision with a scalpel on a living being if you've never done it before? You have someone's life in your hand. And as a lawyer, I felt that way quite often. And it's something that I don't think we pay enough attention to, what we expect out of our public defenders and frankly, our prosecutors, because they're often overworked as well. And the way the system is set up is that despite our constitutional guarantees of a presumption of innocence and the right to a jury trial, the reality of it is it doesn't take much to be indicted or to have a criminal complaint issued against you. It's not anywhere near the standard that we see at a trial beyond a reasonable doubt. It's something called probable cause, which if you imagine those scales of justice, they just have to tip ever so slightly to get probable cause. So if you're a math person, it's 50.00000, add as many zeros as you want. But if you have 1 grain more, that makes it more likely than not, that's enough to be indicted. That's enough to issue a search warrant. That's enough to issue a criminal complaint. And once that's happened, you've been labeled a defendant. We may intellectually understand that that doesn't mean that you're guilty, but think of your own reactions to headlines when you see a TV broadcast or a headline in a newspaper and it says, man charged with rape or woman charged with murder. The fact that someone has been charged changes the way we look at them. And although they are still presumed innocent, the reality is that it becomes up to them to disprove their guilt. And although they may have a right to a jury trial by the Constitution, overwhelmingly criminal cases throughout the United States are resolved by the plea bargain process. And to put that in context, nationally, about 95% of criminal cases are resolved by plea bargain. In Ohio, the last statistic I saw from a couple of years ago is that it's 98%. So that means only 2% of people are actually feeling able to exercise that constitutional right to a jury. And the reality is, in many courtrooms across the country, is if they dare demand their right to a jury that's enshrined by the Constitution and they lose, they will be punished much more harshly than if they took a plea bargain. And that takes us back to marginalized communities and intersection. If I'm an African-American woman who's a single parent and has 2 kids, I can't take a chance for myself or my family by rolling the dice a year from now on what the outcome of a criminal trial is going to be. And although I haven't been proven guilty of anything yet, I may be detained pre-trial. And even a 72-hour lockup on a weekend can be life-altering for people. What happens to those children? Most employers aren't real understanding when you say, I'm sorry, I need to take 3 days off because I'm in jail. They're not thinking about whether you're innocent or not. They've already decided you're a problem. And so we force people into all kinds of horrible decisions. One of the biggest things that we see are innocent people pleading guilty to crimes, not because they don't want to establish their defense, but they can't risk establishing their defense. So think of all the ways that plays out. People of color aren't treated fairly, women aren't treated fairly, people without money aren't treated fairly, people with disabilities aren't treated fairly. But on top of that, they're more vulnerable than anybody else. And the more of those intersections you have, the more difficult it is for you to realize the promise of the justice system that structurally is there, but just doesn't exist in modern realities of how we run our courts. And I don't know that it can the way the system's set up. The fear is that if we ever got away from 95% plea bargain rates, the courts would grind to a halt because they just can't handle that capacity. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's certainly the assumption that most of us operate on.
Okay, and then a question for Dr. Hinton. Could you please talk about some of the factors that contribute to individuals getting involved in lives of crime?
Pierce actually touched on one of the biggest ones that I've seen, to date, I've worked with close to 3,000 people, and poverty is overwhelmingly one of the largest ones that I have personally seen. And of course, I've worked with individuals from all different backgrounds, and so not everybody comes from a poverty, but several things: poverty, coming from broken homes, where the father or the mother or both are in prison, in jail. Some of the individuals I worked with from the age of 10, they were told by their mom, go out on the street to sell drugs, or they would be beaten when they got home. And so, broken families, broken homes, lack of a father figure. So individuals would turn to gangs, some of the individuals I worked with. But I always tell people, if you want to solve, the question I get a lot of times is, how do we solve crime? And the first thing I talk about is, well, if you want to solve crime, let's solve the poverty issue. Let's solve the inequality issue, the education, and kind of like what Pierce was talking about, some of the inequalities that we see. If you solve that, no, you'll never be able to fully eradicate crime, but you could solve a lot of other issues. And a lot of times people steer from that because it's quite honestly, it's very difficult. A lot of the clients that I work with, it's not just about a crime that was committed. Mental health is huge. There's a lot of other factors that play into what causes an individual to take those steps to doing whatever it is that they did. And so context is a big thing that I have when I'm working with people. Unfortunately, like Pierce alluded to, is once you have been accused, labeled, convicted, whatever, once your name has been out there, people would automatically associate you with a crime, and you are put into another category. And nobody wants to hear about the things that preceded that. Now you're labeled by the crime that you supposedly committed or that you did commit, and nobody wants to talk about the first 20 years of that individual's life. And so those poverty is one of the family, home is two of the biggest things that I see with the individuals that I work with, that lead, that kind of open up that door to making some of the decisions that they make.
All right, and Mr. Reed, are there any comments you'd like to add to that?
Nope, I agree.
Okay, and then moving on to another question. So what are some really common misconceptions that the public has concerning the way our criminal justice system works? Mr. Reed, do you want to get started?
Oh, sure. I was
Sorry.
waiting for Dr. Hinton. That's all
Oh,
right.
sorry.
Well, one of the ones that really strikes me in terms of what I hear from our clients is the fact that they are innocent is almost a risk factor for wrongful conviction. And this crosses gender, and this crosses race, and this crosses class. They believe because they are innocent that someone is going to realize that they're innocent. So when they're giving Miranda warnings, for example, they frequently waive them. They don't think they need to lawyer up because they didn't do anything wrong. So they cooperate. And with law enforcement in the initial stages, even if that goes poorly, they think at the next step, somebody else will realize that I'm innocent, whether that's a prosecutor or a judge. And it almost becomes like game theory. You have to decide how far you're going to go with that. But when you're innocent, especially when you have been accused of some of the most horrific crimes that you could be accused of, child sexual assault, murder, things that none of us could ever justify, it is very hard to even envision that somebody could see you as the person who would commit that heinous of an act. And unfortunately, most of our clients believed that things would ultimately work out, only to hear that jury foreperson come back with a guilty verdict. And by then, it's too far. They've already been found guilty despite their innocence. So at that point, there are so many losses. There's the loss of liberty and everything that comes with that. It's the loss of the same things that anybody who is put in prison goes through: the loss of your children, the loss of your freedoms, all of those things. But on a more profound and deeper level, it's the loss of faith, that you have now lost any sense that what you believed your entire life is not accurate. And now they're in this whole world where they may have no experience. Some of our clients have prior criminal justice system involvement, but a significant portion of them have absolutely no understanding other than what they've seen on television. And that kind of psychological devastation to them. One thing I think is really important for people to understand is that in Ohio, our prisons are nothing like the prisons that Martha Stewart goes to, or the parents on the Varsity Blues cases. This isn't Orange is the New Black. This is reality. Ohio's prisons are some of the most dangerous in the country. They're the places, remember, where Hollywood comes to us to get scary prison scenes. Every time I drive up to Cleveland, which I do frequently for work, when you drive by Mansfield and you see billboards advertising a prison where thousands of human lives were destroyed, now being offered as a tourist excursion. Come see where Shawshank Redemption was. I'm here at Halloween. In Southern Ohio at Chillicothe Correctional, there's an older movie that a lot of students wouldn't know called Brubaker, which that prison was chosen as the model for the layout in that movie because it was so horrific. And so don't make any mistake about what prison is and what it isn't. When you are in one of Ohio's prisons, you are in a place where light literally goes out. There is not any real authentic sense of rehabilitation. And for us, so many of our clients are convicted of murder and rape. A lot of them have life sentences. So when you have a life sentence, you lose even the minimal opportunities you have, because the way they look at it is, what do you need a GED or a college degree for? You're spending the rest of your life in here. And it really is just a constant reinforcement to them that they are worthless people and that they have no hope. And those are the kinds of things that I don't think the public really understands. And the fact that people who re-enter into their communities don't want to talk about those experiences doesn't mean that it was a joyous summer camp experience. It was something that probably altered them in ways that are just unimaginable to the rest of us.
Really, and several things. I can vouch for everything Pierce just said firsthand. So I do go into prisons throughout the state of Ohio, and yeah, it is not. This is not the prisons that you see like Martha Stewart. That's not what you see here. And sometimes, there might be a front when the prisons in the media, they'll make everything look nice and shiny and polished, and look at the programs that we have. But when you get in there, you realize that the programs are not well run, or not run at all. For individuals who have a life sentence, you don't qualify because, like Pierce said, why do you need a GED? I know this firsthand. Even as somebody who's a reentry person, I had obstacles to this day when I go into prisons and I'm being asked by correctional guards, why are you helping these people? They'll be right back. And so I can speak to that firsthand, that prisons are particularly in the state of Ohio. And I'm from Louisiana, so I'm very familiar with Angola, but the prisons that are here, yeah, they're not what they portray themselves to be sometimes. And again, the clients that I've worked with, they don't want to talk about it because some of those experiences have been extremely traumatic. The only thing I'll add regarding the questions, Pierce alluded to this as well, was the plea bargain. So many clients that I would work with, they would tell me their story, and I would look at their charge because I had access to their files. And it was the same thing, particularly if you had like a Fed charge. If the feds come to you, you were told plea bargain because, as they would say, Dr. T, I can't afford to go away for 25. So it was easy to say, hey, I'll take my 4. Yes, I'm innocent, but I'm not about to fight that charge. I have kids, I have a family, I can't afford to fight it. And if you do dare to say that I'm innocent, they will make you pay. And so I used to see that a lot from some of my clients, where I would look at their record and there would not be any background, a first time charge. And then I asked the question, did you serve 7 years? Oh yeah. They were going to try to stick me with 25. And so I don't think a lot of people really understand that, as Pierce said, plea bargaining is extremely, extremely high. So it wasn't shocking to see that Ohio has a higher one than a 95% rate, because clients I would see person coming in were no doubt plea bargaining due to what they were being charged with. So for them, 4 years, they wanted to do their time and get it over with and then move on with their life. So it is, again, a lot of people don't see that and don't hear about that.
All right. So this is an excerpt from Dr. King's letter from a Birmingham jail from April 16th, 1963. So Dr. King said, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garnet of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly." How do you see this theme and concept show up in the work that you do?
For me particularly, because whenever I'm talking about people who are coming back to the community, sometimes you do have people out there that are open for second chances, and then you have others who frankly don't care. Why should we care? And when I think about this quote, the biggest thing that comes up is, for me, is where you may not care about this person, but it does affect you financially. And a lot of times I have to appeal to the financial aspect of it. I don't think people realize how expensive it is to incarcerate someone. and it's at a cost of the taxpayer. Corrections is one of the highest expenses statewide in the country. It's part of the biggest part of the budget. And so when people say, lock somebody up and throw away the key, I don't think they really understand what that means and how much it's costing them. And how much money is actually saved when individuals are given those opportunities to come back into the community, reintegrate, get a job. That's actually saving you money. And unfortunately, again, for a lot of people, I have to appeal to the financial aspect of it because they, quite frankly, don't want to hear from people who have backgrounds once you get that stigma. But financially, it's a huge cost to us. And so that is really, when I'm trying to get people's attention, you should care because it's costing you a lot of money to incarcerate people who, quite frankly, don't belong in jail, don't need to be in prison. And as Pierce alluded to, for a lot of them, they were innocent, they plea bargain, and it's costing us money, costing you money. So I think that is one of the quotes. When I think about this quote, that's what stands out to me.
I agree with the economics of it, but I think we lose something even more valuable, at least in the realm of wrongful conviction. I think people can understand how somebody who has been wrongfully convicted has been impacted. They may not be able to fully comprehend it, but it sounds horrible. And I think most of us have that almost intuitive recognition of that. But then we stop thinking about it. We don't realize how much it affects everyone else. One of my favorite clients is a man who lost 17 years of his life to prison for a rape he didn't commit. And we talk about that case, and it's been headlines, particularly in Cleveland, where the crime occurred. But what people don't talk about with him, his name is Chris, is that Chris had an incredible partner, Lena. They had 2 small children. The last thing his elder daughter remembered, and she was about 5, was a police officer letting her hug her father goodbye. And he had a newborn son, Chris Jr., who wasn't even a year old at the time. And for the next 17 years of their lives, the only time they saw their father was behind bars. And that impacts them in ways. And for Lena, she was the person who not only had to keep her family together, and part of that is, how do you take 2 kids on a bus or in a car to an institution that's 4.5 hours away from you because the person you love got shipped to the other side of the state? And you still have to figure out how the kids are going to get to soccer practice and do their tutoring and how you're going to get to your job. And that means that that whole family has suffered. And in that particular community, there wasn't a single neighbor or person who had ever known Chris who would even think he was capable of rape. And so then they lose something, this fine man that they have loved, and the devastation of losing him, there's a pain that all of them feel. So you can see how that trickles out. But all too often what happens in wrongful conviction are there are 2 people who never get talked about who should. One of them is the person who actually committed the crime. And what we see in sexual assault cases is that while an innocent person is in prison, the person who committed the crime is still free and often offends against other people. So if we would have got it right in that case to begin with, maybe we could have saved some other people, usually women, from having to endure something like that. But the person who almost never gets talked about is the crime victim. So I work with a lot of people when I'm at the General Assembly, Ohio's legislature, who are very conservative, who are very law enforcement oriented. And one of the things I always stress to them is that it's fine that you care about victims. We should all care about victims. But when there's a wrongful conviction, that victim hasn't been served at all. In fact, that victim is going to be traumatized all over again when a detective or an assistant prosecutor comes knocking on their door and tells them 10 or 15 or 20 years after the fact that the person who's been in prison all that time for committing the crime is not in fact the person who committed the crime. And the reality is that 10 or 15 or 20 years later, it's almost impossible to re-prosecute. So that victim is never going to get what we think of as justice, unless by chance we have a DNA match and it's somebody we know and we can say, it wasn't Chris, it was this other person who raped you. But that isn't the same sense of justice. And then those victims and their families also suffer. So again, we have another trickling out effect. But the reality is too, we all lose something in a wrongful conviction case. We all lose the faith, even if it's shreds of faith at this point, that the system works. It's another reminder to us of how flawed the system is. And it's another bit of suffering that I think our collective psyche goes through, because you just don't know how you're ever going to fix all these problems, from systemic racism to wrongful conviction to access to justice in a much broader sense. It really is a very demoralizing thing, I think, for people across the spectrum. And that is something that's all too often overlooked.
All right, and kind of going along with that, is there anything that we can do as students and active citizens to try to combat these issues that we've discussed here tonight?
Yes. There are lots of things you can do. If you're at the Ohio State University, check out the OIPU chapter at Ohio State. It is one of the best chapters that we have. We operate on, I think, 11 college campuses around the great state of Ohio. And our advisor for that chapter, who also works for the mighty Glenn School, Elaine McLaughlin Overholt, has really done an amazing job at revitalizing that chapter. And we consistently see some of the best student leaders, including our current leader, Abriana, who I think is how I got invited to this. So she's my golden ticket. I hope she can get me on a red carpet someday. But the OIPU chapter is not really intended to be a pipeline to law school. It's fine if you want to go to law school. Call me and I'll tell you all the reasons to do it and all the reasons not to. But really what we're trying to do is educate people, no matter what your major is or what your career path is. You know, wrongful conviction is something that lawyers aren't always going to be the heroes, and far too often they're not. We rely on people who work in forensic labs. I was just in Columbus last night. I was doing an event over at Capitol Law School about some legislative reform around death penalty abolition in Ohio. This year is the farthest that an abolition bill has ever gone. It doesn't mean it's going to be enacted into law, but we're making progress on it. And while I'm doing that on one part of Broad Street, about 10 blocks away over at the courthouse, we have a client, the 34th one that the Ohio Innocence Project has been able to free, a man who was walking out of prison after 17 years for a home invasion he didn't commit. And what's so significant about that is our students who had a good understanding of science were able to research and find a particular technique that allowed us to analyze a fingerprint that was on a bullet shell casing. And that had never been done before. I love science, but I'm horrible at math. So that's not what my skill set is going to be. But to have students who understood hard science and a way to apply it in a novel way is something that we want to happen. We want to reach out to people who want to be mental health professionals. There's a whole set of incredibly rewarding jobs, regardless of how somebody ended up in prison, wrongfully or rightfully, for lack of a better term. We need people who can help them do have more opportunities in their freedom, so that freedom actually is freedom for them, not the suffering that just continues. People who want to be journalists are some of our biggest allies. And for the last, I don't know, 5 years or so, the attack on the media is something that is just devastating. You know, democracy exists in part because we have those freedoms. So when we're working on campuses, we want anybody, no matter what profession you want to go into, I will have a link to wrongful conviction for you. So check out our OIPU chapter. But the two things that everybody hates when I tell them, when they ask this question, we get it a lot, and it's usually a lot of eye rolling, but I am sincere in this. Not only register to vote, but vote smart. And all too often in Ohio, especially young people, don't realize that you are electing your county prosecutors. You are electing your county sheriffs. You are electing judges at every level of the judiciary. There are 700 judges, state court judges in Ohio. Those judges have a huge impact on people's lives. This fall, when there's going to be all kinds of political ads drowning out about congressional races and Senate races, you are likely to overlook that there are 2 Ohio Supreme Court justices who are going to be running. You have to know who you're voting for, and you have to look beyond whatever advertising or labels people are attaching to their campaigns. It's just like if you were buying a suit or a car or a meal. There's no Yelp review for judicial candidates, but there's this amazing thing called Google, where if you actually devote a few hours to it, you can make the most informed decision, and one that will actually have impact on the way our judiciary operates. And the other thing is, if you get called for jury service, show up. You can't tell me that you care about wrongful conviction or just about equity and equality in the criminal justice system and then blow off jury service. And yes, it's going to be a minor inconvenience in your life. But go back to what I said at the beginning. All those innocent people who kept putting faith in somebody in the system, the law enforcement personnel, the prosecutor, the defense attorney, the judge, if all of those things fail, what matters is who's on the jury. And I know it's not a perfect system, I still have more faith in a jury than I do anybody else in the system, because you have a group of people who are bringing their collective experience and knowledge to it. And if that jury is a monolithic group of white retirees from the suburbs who always show up for jury duty, that's the viewpoint that we are going to have. And that's not to say that all white suburban retirees think alike, but I'm pretty sure any of you whose family members may reflect that, when you go home at the holidays, you don't always agree about things. And that kind of debate is what is so critical in a jury room, where people talk about it and they offer different perspectives. So make sure you're registered to vote, make sure you vote and you complete the entire ballot, and make sure you show up for jury duty. Thank you. I'm off my soapbox now.
Just to echo Pierce, I highly recommend you all visit OIP, the Ohio Innocence Project. One of the things I always say to my class is you are the next generation. You are the next people in the criminal justice field, whether you want to go into law school, whether you want to be a police officer, FBI agent, or researcher. Chances are I'll be seeing some of you all the next couple of years. It is going to be you. Getting an education from the Ohio State University is extremely important, but getting that hands-on experience and literally getting out there and getting involved is the best thing that you can do for yourself. Me personally, I just because I worked for Alvis, I would highly recommend you could visit their website, www.alvis180.org, but there's a number of organizations out there. To date, I've actually connected 30 of my own students to Alvis, who had no experience in and out of halfway houses. They work as case managers, program managers. But again, that's just one way. There's so many different areas in Columbus. Volunteer, get out. One of the biggest things I get from students is, well, Dr. T, I have no experience. What can I do? And you will be shocked. Something as simple as this iPhone in my hand, technology. You all are Zoom masters. Technology comes natural to you because you grew up on that. For a lot of the clients we work with, they've been in prison. It's a whole new world. It's scary when they come out. Something that people forget about. And for those of you who haven't looked at it, I highly recommend you look at the documentary on Jonathan Irons. It was an individual went to prison was wrongfully convicted and served 22 years of a 50-year sentence. And WNBA star Maya Moore and a team of people helped to release him. And a lot of times we look at, oh, he got out, he's innocent, great. He walks off into the sunset. They walk off into the sunset. And the reality is that just does not happen. There's a lot of things. That's 22 years of his life that was lost. There are a lot of things that Pierce could speak to better than I can that are lost. And so whether somebody is innocent or guilty, when they come out of the criminal justice system, there's a whole bunch of challenges. Things that you all do every day that you all take for granted as students. Individuals need help with coming out, cell phone, computer, filling out a job application online, attaching sending a file as an attachment on the resume. You all can do those things. So a lot of times it doesn't necessarily have to be something complicated. It's just simply going downtown, going throughout, using Google and looking up nonprofit agencies, reentry work, and signing up to volunteer. And so I highly recommend Alvis, but there's so many things out there that you can do. But jump in, don't wait, don't delay. Don't look at Ohio Innocence Project and say, I could never do that. Go jump in. As Pierce said, and I would echo this, it's no good to come to these things and listen and then simply do nothing. Jump out there, get that experience. It doesn't matter what field you want to go in the criminal justice system. Having that knowledge and that education empowers you to move forward so that when you are in those positions of power and influence, you can draw upon that experience. So don't wait, jump into it now with both feet.
All right. Thank you both so much. And then just to start wrapping up, would you guys have any contact information that you could share for anyone who may want to reach out with additional questions?
Sure. My email address is, feel free to email me, Hinton, HINTON .212@osu.edu. And just as a heads up, I will be teaching an Inside Out class in spring of next year at St. Marysville Prison. So if you were somebody that is interested in taking that course, feel free to reach out to me or any other questions.
And you're welcome to contact me as well. My email is Pierce, PIERCE .reed, REED @uc.edu. UC as in UC Bearcats, as in football. I know we still finish behind you, but you got to root for us. Come on, you've had.
All right. So with that, we are finishing up our panel on criminal justice issues. So thank you again to our panelists, Dr. Terrance Hinton and Pierce Reed, for sharing your experiences and expertise. And again, another thank you to everyone on the MLK Initiative for their hard work in coordinating all events for MLK Week. And finally, thank you to our audience for attending this panel. We really hope it was informative and you can take what you learned tonight to continue closing the gap. So thank you to everybody for taking the time to honor Dr. King's legacy this week. Good night.
Take care.